Urban Cultural Studies,
the podcast.
book teaser.
And welcome to Urban Cultural Studies podcast. Today what I have for you is a little different. It is a draft introduction for a book that I've been working on Antonio López Garcia's Everyday Urban Worlds, A Philosophy of Painting. And this is not an artist biography, but it does look at Antonio López Garcia, who is quite possibly Spain's most famous living painter. Many of his works have to do with urban themes. He's well known for doing urban scenes of Madrid. The gulf separating Antonio López Garcia from other, certainly more famous Spanish artists is immense. Pablo Picasso, Salvador Dalí, Juan Gris, Joan Miró, for example, who in the 20th century captured an international public's interest by way of abstract principles. Francisco de Goya, who in the late 18th century began his career sketching somewhat unambitious designs for tapestries, and by the early 19th century came to embody an ever more dark and haunting artistic perspective. Diego Velázquez, who in the 17th century turned painting on its ear with the complex portrait Las Meninas. All of these Spanish painters have beyond a doubt achieved more lasting notoriety than our Antonio López. Still, born in 1936 in Tomelloso, and at the time of this writing still living in 21st century Madrid, López Garcia nonetheless belongs to a time and to a place that are significant because they are our own. That is to say, his paintings are testament to the fact that we live in an urban society and within an urban time. Although he worked also in sculpture and non-urban themes, over the course of his life, Antonio López Garcia would become identified with his realistic portrayals of the Spanish capital itself. As art curator and critic Cheryl Brutvan notes, it is the city of Madrid where López reached maturity as an artist and which embodied his personal desires that would become one of his most enduring subjects. Despite the city's somber tone and run-down appearance during its economic and political isolation of the 1960s, López immersed himself in its environment, studying it with intelligence and affection. The artist dedicated numerous and expansive painted works to various views of the city, works whose overlapping and lengthy dates of composition showcase the crucial temporal aspect of his artistic work. And so here are some examples. Terraza de Lucio, 1962 to 1990. El Norte de Madrid desde la Maliciosa, 1962 to 1964. Madrid desde el Cerro Tío Pío, 1962 to 63. Atocha, 1964. Madrid Sur, 1965 to 1985. Madrid hacia el Observatorio, 1965 to 1970. Gran Vía, 1974 to 1981. Madrid desde Torres Blancas, 1976 to 82. Madrid desde Capitanaya, 1987 to 1994. Afueras de Madrid desde el Cerro de Almodóvar, 1990 to 2004. And finally, Madrid desde la Torre de Bomberos de Vallecas, 1997 to 2006. While this book attempts to do justice to López Garcia's artistic genius, one that is at risk of being unfairly overshadowed by the accomplishments of previous masters, its underlying goal is somewhat different. This goal is not to provide an artistic biography, nor launch an extensive analysis of his works, but rather to critically explore the urban and philosophical issues raised by his unique approach. From this perspective, the artist's paintings are not mere static images to be admired passively. Instead, they're catalysts that move us to reflect actively upon our contemporary urban world. Ultimately, those who view his urban scenes are pushed to reconcile this contemplative artistic space with their own concrete lived spaces of the everyday. As the chapters in Antonio López Garcia's Everyday Urban Worlds, A Philosophy of Painting explore, this move to make sense of the artist's approach to painting proves to be a deceptively simple act. This is perhaps true with all visual art. which we routinely catalog and periodize as if speaking in simplistic terms were the best way to reach an understanding of its value. In this way, the prepackaged history of art to which the wider public is regularly exposed is somewhat misleading. Upon closer inspection, Picasso, Dalí, Gris and Miró turn out not to be the mere abstract escapists they are often made to seem. Goya's historical themes, El 2 de Mayo and El 3 de Mayo, for example, are not merely documents of objective events, but evince a subtle and nuanced subjectivity. Velázquez's Las Meninas, as Michel Foucault would make clear in his book, The Order of Things, an Archaeology of the Human Sciences, is not a simple act of self-portraiture, but moreover signals a modern shift in the nature and function of the sign. The facile periodization, which serves as a way of structuring introductory art history courses, perhaps, groupings of time periods as well as the isms, surrealism, cubism, abstract expressionism, fauvism, which abound, perhaps reflects a well-intentioned desire to ground artistic discussion in historical contexts. This desire should certainly not be vitiated outright. All the same, however, it may encourage some to reduce complex artistic products to simple objects of appreciation. It may also foment an attitude of artistic collectionism. We live, after all, in a time when art is more of a commodity than it has ever been. Who among us has not seen works of the most famous artists used to sell everyday consumer items? A set of Joan Miró-styled espresso cups for sale at the Reina Sofia Museum in Madrid, for example, or at Bed Bath & Beyond, a melting wall clock recalling the warped time-telling devices in Dalí's widely recognized painting, The Persistence of Memory. Painting, already an image, has been reduced to a mere surface. It is notable that during the 1960s, French situationist Guy Debord used the phrase "the society of the spectacle" to refer to the way in which practices of visual consumption had effected a sea change in the nature of human relationships. More and more, relationships between people in contemporary urban society are mediated by images. As it is with other aspects of contemporary urban society, art, too, has become a spectacle. Seen against this backdrop, Antonio López Garcia's art functions to reorient our urbanized consciousness. While his paintings force us to reconsider how we see art, and thus also how we see ourselves, they also nudge us away from some of the common and objectifying temptations to which we all fall prey now and again. López Garcia's urban scenes are themselves acts of resistance. They remind us that paintings are not surfaces, but rather entire worlds which overlap with our own. More important, these are human worlds and not merely object worlds or collections of images. Of course, all art, necessarily, it will be said, serves as a reflection of our human desires, our flaws, limitations, and our dreams. Art is an opportunity, as Velázquez showed us so long ago through Las Meninas, to externalize and reproduce aspects of ourselves upon a canvas, and even, especially, to reflect on the process of self-representation. Across the artistic spectrum, these processes of representation are carried out in highly varied and variable ways, and within this spectrum, López Garcia's art occupies a most curious place. Staring into Antonio López Garcia's paintings, what is it that we see? We see that there can be no surface without depth, that there can be no object without totality, no space without time. It is time that is the real subject of his paintings, even though it may take the guise here of everyday interior objects, for example, his Nueva Nevera, and there of a city street exterior, his Gran Via. If we are to be fair to López Garcia's method, to his style, and to the complexity of his work, our exploration of his paintings must take his realist approach to everyday interiors as a natural complement to his almost photographic representation of urban exteriors. Taken together, these interior and exterior scenes come to constitute a totality of everyday life. In essence, They invite us to enter a single, seamless, everyday urban world. This world is immediately recognizable, and yet it is somehow also quite unfamiliar. This strange and alluring mixture leads us beyond mere appreciation toward a deeper engagement with his images. Gazing upon López Garcia's painted urban landscapes, we simultaneously confront both the limitations of spatial representation and the inescapable reality of the passage of time. His paintings unceasingly redirect us from the simple perception of static objects in space toward a more complex notion of temporal experience. If his is a realism, a hyperrealism, some have said, on account of his extremely detailed use of light, then it is a hyperrealism that seeks to represent time. By asserting the reality of temporality, his paintings reveal also the temporal nature of human thought and experience. The representation of space, of spaces, leads us back toward contemplation of an ever-mobile human consciousness. Light and detail are the vehicle of this transformative shift in perception. Its end goal is none other than a reassessment of our own thinking, its temporal nature, and its embodiment in an urbanized modernity. It should be noted, of course, that as processes of urbanization continue to expand and intensify worldwide, the experience of this urban modernity is one shared by an ever greater percentage of the globe's population. As rates of urbanization increase, Antonio López Garcia's paintings never stop prompting us to reflect on what cities are, on what it means to live in urbanized society, and on how urbanism stems from and in turn influences human relationships. It should be clear by now that the book you are reading is not a straightforward work of art history as much as it is an eclectic work of urban philosophy. As such, it seeks to dialogue with a wide range of discourses, from art and philosophy to urban studies, geography, architecture, literature, cinema, and more. Each of the chapters that follow takes as its point of departure discussion of a single concrete image by the Spanish painter. Chapter 1 begins with a discussion of the artist's Gran Via, which represents the Spanish capital's central artery from ground level. Chapter 2 rises in elevation to capture Madrid desde Torres Blancas. And Chapter 3 turns to questions of an even larger scale in discussion of Madrid desde la Torre de Bomberos de Vallecas, reflecting retrospectively on how each of these images are in truth windows into one single if complex urban totality. A brief epilogue turns to the film El Sol del Membrillo, in which López García played himself to evince temporality as the core of his philosophy of painting. The progression from each chapter to the next is meant to evoke a series of simultaneous movements, from the concrete to the abstract, from the street-level view to the city scale, from the material-built environment captured in time to the pole of pure philosophical temporality, back to the tangible reality of the everyday. As we move to understand these three paintings themselves, so too must we venture beyond the frame of the canvas, further then into the urbanized society within which they were produced and which has inspired them. In this contemplative movement, nothing is off limits. Everything is connected through Antonio López Garcia's everyday urban worlds. Remember that you can access the Journal of Urban Cultural Studies in both print and online formats through Intellect Publishers, and make sure to follow our multi-authored blog for more urban discussions at urbanculturalstudies.wordpress.com.